Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Brené Brown said, "Regret is one of our most powerful emotional reminders that reflection, change, and growth are necessary. When used constructively, it's a call to courage and a path to wisdom." Well, on today's episode, we're going to explore the topic of regret, how it works, the consequences of regret, making regret work for you instead of against you, and more. My guest was educated at Yale University. He's the founder and director of the American Institute for Cognitive Therapy, an award-winning clinician, a clinical professor of psychology in the psychiatry department at Weill Cornell Medical College, a keynote speaker, and the author and editor of 29 books, including The Worry Cure and his most recent book, which we're going to be talking about on this episode. He's been featured in major media outlets, including the New York Times, Sunday Magazine, Forbes, Fortune, Newsweek, and Psychology Today. Please welcome the man who's helping all of us release ourselves from the if-only trap, Dr. Robert Leahy. Dr. Leahy, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jay, for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
As am I. I know this is going to be a great one. What an incredible topic, and certainly something that we can all relate to. I'm sure we all experience it, and I want to learn from you and from your insights, and I know it's going to be a wonderful conversation. So let's dive right in. I thought maybe a good starting point would be for you to share with all of us perhaps a memorable or a profound experience from your life and how that experience has influenced the work that you do today.
Well, I think in terms of an experience that influenced my work today, what actually got me to leave the straight academic life to being more involved with clinical work was one of my best friends from Yale committed suicide. And I realized that I wanted my work to be really devoted to helping people overcome depression and to find meaning in their lives. And that's what kind of launched me on my career path into clinical work and writing and research for many, many years now. And I don't regret that. I'm really happy that I have been part of helping a lot of people, both from my clinical work as a therapist and from training people around the world in my writings to spread the word that if you're depressed or anxious, you can get help.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. I certainly do appreciate that. When were you first exposed to cognitive behavioral therapy?
Well, I'm old enough to say that when I was in graduate school and college, there was no cognitive behavior therapy. It was pretty much all psychoanalytic, which I found incredibly interesting. But then as I began reading the research, it did not seem to be as helpful as I would want it to be. But I recall I got interested in cognitive therapy when I was much younger and I was going through a breakup in a relationship and I was feeling depressed. And I began reading the work of Aaron Beck. And I found that really spoke to me. It really helped me cope. So I thought if it can help me cope, maybe I can use this to help other people. It just made a lot of sense. It was very practical. It was very active oriented, very much here and now oriented.
So how does it differ? Let me back up. For to be able to explain the difference between cognitive behavioral therapy and other types of therapy, what would be a good way of explaining that in layman's terms for our audience?
Yeah, so more traditional type of psychoanalytic or psychodynamic therapy, there's really not much structure in a session. It's just the patient coming in and saying whatever is on their mind, recalling dreams. The therapist is a much more passive role. There's no homework assignment. Um, Occasionally there are interpretations, but it's more of an opportunity for a patient to express spontaneously what they're thinking and feeling. Cognitive behavior therapy is more problem solving in its orientation. It's based on the idea that your depression or anxiety is partly the result of the way you think or how you cope with your emotions. It's more rational. It's more here and now. Patients get homework assignments. We assess progress. There are hundreds of studies showing that cognitive behavior therapy is quite effective. It's not completely effective. No treatment completely is effective with all patients, but it's by far the most widely studied form of psychotherapy. And I think the appeal for the general public is that it makes sense. There's no mystery. The patient, it's sort of empowering. The patient becomes their own therapist. So, for example, one of the things we often do in cognitive behavior therapy, we recommend things for people to read, either articles or podcasts or books or whatever that can help them understand and learn the techniques to cope with the difficulties they're facing.
And this speaks to what you had shared when you had gone through this breakup, and there was an interest at that point in exploring what cognitive therapy was about. And if we were to wind the clock back and go to that particular period of time, were you seeing someone? Were you seeing a therapist, or did you basically, was this something where you helped yourself?
No, I wasn't seeing a therapist at that time. I probably should have, but what I was doing is I was trying to use what I was reading, the techniques I was using to help myself. And I could see that they really did help myself. And then I realized, Jay, just as a side comment, when I was a kid, I grew up in a very poor family. My parents were divorced. We were on welfare for a while. We lived in a housing project. And I wanted to get into college. I grew up in New Haven. And the only college I knew about was Yale. So I thought, how do I get into college? I'm not going. This school is not going to prepare me. So I actually made a plan. I had behavioral assignments. I kept a diary. I had targets for every day, every week. I wasn't obsessive compulsive. I had friends. I played basketball 3 or 4 hours a day probably. But I was actually applying cognitive behavior therapy when I was 13, 14 years old. And I did get into Yale. So it really struck me as, yeah, this actually makes sense. Empowering somebody, giving them the tools, not feeling that you have to take a passive attitude about making progress. That you can plan your progress, and you can keep track of your progress. So it really resonated to me when I was, trying to cope with that breakup. It wasn't a terrible thing in my life, but it was empowering, and I kind of realized, yeah, I actually used some of this when I was 13 or 14, and I can tell you that I use these ideas on myself on a regular basis. If I start ruminating, my wife will say, "Well, Bob, what would you say to one of your patients And I say, that's not fair. I'm looking for validation and expression, and I want to be a victim. But then I realize, okay, what would I say to my patient? And then I have a litany of advice that I should take myself.
That is so interesting. So your wife, obviously being around you, knows many of the tools as well.
Yeah, and she knows that I know them, but it's like Dr. Heal Thyself.
Right, absolutely. So speaking of your wife is Helen,
Yes.
and you acknowledge her at the beginning of your most recent book. How did the two of you meet?
That's a great story, Jay. My wife actually used to be a rockette.
Really?
Yeah, she used to be a rockette and a Broadway dancer and a choreographer and all that. And we met on the subway. And I started a conversation with her, and I got her phone number, her calling service. This is years ago. And I called her up, and we're talking on the phone. Turns out she lives across the street from me, and I could see her out the window. So that was love at first sight. It's a real New York story, Jay.
I love that. That is so good. And you never look back. That's all it took. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I want to talk about your writing. You're a prolific writer, obviously. 29 books and possibly counting, right? There might be another one in there that you're in the process of working on.
Month, yeah.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that. So speak about the writing process itself for you. When you decide that you're going to write a book, so let's talk about your most recent book, not the one that's coming out next month, but your most recent book, if only. What is it about the topic at that moment that speaks to you where you feel like this, I have something to say on this that I need to get into the hands of the general population? Just, I'm trying to understand, because so many books, so much content, helping so many people. Where does all that come from for you?
Well, I think what I do is probably different from a lot of academics. I'm not an academic. I mean, I'm a clinical professor in a psychiatry department, but I'm not a full-time academic. My job is basically seeing patients, and I have an institute in New York. So I spend a lot of my reflection thinking about what patients have told me. And I think about, people I know in my personal life or myself, and what people, and I think what drives me is curiosity. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm very curious about regret. I'm very curious about worry. I'm going to write a book on envy. I'm very curious about envy. And so curiosity it may have killed the cat, but it really motivates me to write a book. And so I kind of look at writing a book as a great opportunity to learn something. I mean, I would actually say, Jay, that probably what really motivates me is I don't want to be bored. I want to have a challenge. And so when I thought about regret, I thought, my God, every decision potentially involves regret. I've seen people who are like 90 years old who are regretting decisions they made almost 70 years ago. I see, patients who won't make a decision, won't get out of a bad relationship because they anticipate regret. So I developed this curiosity. And then what I like to do when I plan a book, I mean, most people, when they write a book proposal, it's like about 10 or 15 pages. I write a 70-page book proposal. I mean, what I do is I often give lectures and keynotes and workshops on the topic before I write the book. And so I outline in great detail what I'm going to write. I don't just simply wait for the muses to be inspired and just spontaneously say what's on the top of my head. I outline it in detail, and then one of my colleagues says, "What you do, Bob, is you do a mind dump." It's kind of like, here it is. All right, boom. And then it's like working out. Like on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday morning, I'll get up at 6:30, have breakfast, read the news online, feel miserable looking at everything. And then I write for about 2 hours. I never write for more than an hour and a half or 2 hours. So it's like having a plan. And so, you don't, like an old friend of mine years ago, who actually became a very famous playwright, said, you don't become successful waiting for the muses to inspire you. It's a habit of writing, but you have to have a detailed plan. And I recall that I was talking with one of my editors, one of my publishers, about somebody who was like 10 years late in a book. And
wow.
I said, I thought they said they wanted to write a book. And he said, they all say that they all say they want to write a book. What they really mean is, I wish I had written a book. and so it's like anything else in life. It's like you have to have a business plan to be successful
Sure.
in business. You have to have a writing plan. You have to commit to the action. You have to do it when you're not inspired. You have to do what you don't want to do on a regular basis. That's how you make progress.
So you're very disciplined about your approach.
I'm not saying I live up to my plan, but I have a plan. And I can tell you, I regret when I don't have a plan. I regret that oh my God, I didn't get anything done, So it's kind of like the plan nudges you in that direction. And the plan's not unreasonable. I mean, you could write 2 pages in an hour and a half. So,
amazing.
and I think also, Jay, unlike academics, I'm actually talking to real people. I mean, there are people in academics who are writing books on therapy who don't see patients, right? And so it's kind of like, well, what the hell do you know about patients if you're not in the trenches?
Absolutely.
And so I think the patients, in a way, are the voice that I share with the reader. So it's not like abstract thoughts and a convoluted Teutonic language that nobody can understand except 3 people in the Ivy League. This is the real thing. These are the real people. And what I want the reader to feel is, that sounds like me. That's the key thing, I think. To feel like, yeah.
And you've done that, and I wanted to mention that because as you were sharing this, and you had mentioned about listening, these are actual stories, right, from listening to your patients, and you're able to articulate and present the material in a way that the reader can actually take something away from it and do something with it, right? Becomes tools, becomes strategies, and things that we can actually apply that are real world scenarios that many of us can relate to. And I'm so appreciative of the way that you bring your gift to life. It truly is quite a remarkable process. And again, being so prolific about it. And I can't wait to see what comes out about envy. That should be a really interesting one as well. So speaking of, when you were able to go to Yale, I believe, did you go to Yale was that on a scholarship?
Oh yeah. I never paid a penny for any of my education.
How did that, or did it change at all the way that you saw yourself? So when you receive that scholarship and you're in Yale, did it change at all your view of who you are, of yourself?
I'm not sure if it changed I think when I first got into Yale, just to be honest with you, I think that my basic idea, I accomplished my goal, and now I'm just going to have a good time. So
Okay.
for the first couple of years, I was not what I would consider the ideal student, you know. But I think what it made me realize is how much knowledge there is that I don't have, and I think, I read a lot. I think I have a pretty good memory, but I tell my wife my memory is so good I can remember things that never happened. That I I think that what I realize is that there's so much for me to learn that I'll never learn everything I want to learn, and that's, I think, the curiosity thing. I think a good education is not the collection of facts or even skills. It's the collection of goals about what's important to learn and how to learn it. I think the other part of it is I think one of the advantages of going to a place like Yale is, the kind of friendships you meet and stuff. A lot of my friends are people I've known since college or graduate school for many, many years. And it's an interesting thing about why we value old friends, and they kind of knew you when, and they still accept me. They knew me when I was what? Leahy wrote 29 books, right? I'm surprised you can put together a coherent sentence. So
that's so funny.
It's, but I think part of growing up poor and overcoming, obstacles and stuff is to be able to empathize with other people going through any difficulty at all. Absolutely. And I think that it also gives me a sense of appreciation and gratitude, and in a sense of what I call, adaptive humility. I mean, I think one of the reasons why some people regret things is that they don't have enough humility, that they think their life is going to be absolutely fabulous, especially young people today, that they have what I call existential perfectionism. They're going to have the job that's fulfilling. They're going to have the great relationship, a great apartment in Brooklyn or the Upper West Side that cost $5 million for their parents. The world was not constructed to give you what you want. And one of the lessons I try to share with people, you're never going to get what you really want. You're never going to get what you really want, especially on your terms, but you'll get a lot more than what you need. And I think that, the irony of it is that we can see, as you know, Jay, in the last 30 years, young people, such an increase of depression and anxiety and suicide, while objectively speaking, in many ways, people are better off materially than they were 30 years ago. There's absolutely no question about it. Even with inflation, I mean, that's a little bump compared to what people were dealing with 30, 40, 50 years ago. People are objectively better off, and they're more depressed, more anxious, less trusting, more lonely, all of that. So yeah.
I was just going to ask, with all that said, do you think that today are we less prepared? Are young people today less prepared to manage regret and deal with that than maybe you were, than I was growing up?
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting is that that if you look at the research on, there's a search engine that Google has called Google Ngram, where you could look at how often a particular word was mentioned in printed literature going back to 1850. And if you look at the use of the word regret between the years about 1980 and 2019, that the use of the word regret went way up during that time, way up. Rates of anxiety and depression went way up from about 1987 to about 2017. Perfectionism went, in terms of being measured, in terms of people actually endorsing perfectionistic beliefs, perfectionism went up considerably. So what's happened with regret, and I think this is an answer to your question, Jay, is what happened is that people had perfectionistic ideas about what life should be. They had a life of excessive demands about how my life should be, and that if you think about regret, it's always measured by your expectation. Like my expectation when I was 17 years old, I would be happy if I lived in a 2-family house in a working class neighborhood as an adult. So whatever I got exceeded expectations. I couldn't imagine having what I have, sort of, So, but if you have these, and social media, as you know, since about 2008, has just proliferated these expectations. I mean, kids, especially girls, comparing their body image with the idealized bodies that they see on the internet and Instagram. The more time they spent on Instagram for teenage girls, the more anxious and more body dysmorphic disorder they have, and the more suicidal they feel. So expectations drive regret. And that's why I think one of the things to think about is, what were your expectations? I mean, like some people say, for example, a person who says, a patient of mine a few years ago, been with this woman for about 4 or 5 years, living with her for 3 years, and saying, well, I don't know if I should get married because I have mixed feelings about her. He has mixed feelings about his girlfriend, knowing her for 5 years. And so he's afraid he's going to regret it. And so I thought, well, there are 2 possible reasons why you have mixed feelings. One is that she's the wrong person, and the other is that you're not an idiot. So here's the second part. You're not an idiot because you now know each other. Do you have mixed feelings about your best friend? Do you have mixed feelings about your parents? The only creature you don't have mixed feelings about is your dog, right? Because you completely idealize your dog and what they're thinking. But of course you have mixed feelings. And when you get married, you'll have more mixed feelings. So his expectation, Jay, this is like the perfectionistic pure model. My expectation is I should never have mixed feelings about my partner, or mixed feelings about my work, or mixed feelings about like people say, oh, how could you live in New York City? It's like there's so much noise, it's so expensive. Why is it so expensive? Because everybody wants to live in New York City. Because,
supply and demand.
It's the greatest city in the world, and it's the worst city in the world. So it's all about the trade-offs. It's not about, oh, this is the Garden of Eden and Nirvana, and everybody's walking around with a smiley face and doing mushrooms all the time. This is not the reality of life. Is about mixed feelings. And so I think what's happened with young people is that their expectations have been fed by algorithms, fed by social media, fed by advertising, and also fed by the increasing inequality. Like if you look at the Gini index, which is an economic index of economic inequality, the degree of disparity of wealth or income in the United States, that increases pretty much at the same rate that the use of the word regret increases. It's the same rate as perfectionism increases. So you can think about, oh, I'm not Elon Musk, I'm not worth $180 billion or whatever. So therefore I'm a loser, or I don't have a yacht, or I don't have a $100,000 car, or or I'm not a movie star, or whatever it is. So therefore I can't be satisfied. So we have a dissatisfaction. We have a dissatisfaction syndrome it's almost like people are afraid of being satisfied. And it's kind of like, I've said some people, if I have a magic wand, like Wall Street, I've had a lot of Wall Street patients. If I had a magic wand, you could become satisfied with what you have. Would you want me to wave the magic wand? And almost universally, they say, have mixed feelings about it. And part of me said, no, I don't want to be satisfied, because then I'll lose my edge, And so there's kind of like this sense of which I have to be anxious, I have to be dissatisfied to make progress. Now, in some ways, there's a little bit of truth in that. It's kind of like if you don't have any arousal and you're completely stoned out, whatever, you're not going to get off the couch. You'll watch every rerun on Netflix you can possibly stay awake for. But if you have a little bit of dissatisfaction, a little bit of like I want to do a little bit better, then you have enough motivation to do something. But if it's sort of like I have to work 60 hours a week to keep up with the minimum, then you're going to be miserable. So interesting study that was done about 4 years ago in England.
Okay.
How happy are you with your work? The most unhappy people at work were people in banking. And close behind were people who were lawyers. The happiest occupation were hairstylists and people working in landscaping or florists.
Is that right?
The landscaping and florists, I'm around beautiful, flowers, and I'm outside. And the hairstylists say, "Oh, I'm talking and touching people," and So you have pretty high suicide rates among people in banking and high rates of depression among lawyers.
That is so interesting. Now, in researching you, I understand that your original career path was law. That is something that you had planned to do. Did I read that correctly?
Well, I think everybody in high school thought I was going to be a lawyer, but when I started college, I lost interest in that, and at first I was an English major, and then I went over to psychology and stuff like that. But I'm very glad I did not pursue law.
Clearly, you made the right choice.
I hope so.
Absolutely. So, with what you were just describing and talking about in terms of young people today, the impact of social media, do you actually see young people in your practice?
Yeah.
So have you seen an increase in younger patients as a result of everything that you had just mentioned?
Yeah, so I have an institute, so we have 10 other therapists on the staff. And so over the years, we've seen an increase of young people, college age people, especially teenagers and so forth. And, the kind of issues about body image, about aspiration, about the demand, about not living up to the meritocracy. You have to be the best to be good enough. For example, at Yale, you would think at Yale they have a residential college system where you're basically living in the same sort of area with about 300 other undergraduates. You get to know everybody. So when I was in college, you got to know almost everybody in your residential college. Now, when kids walk into the residential college dining room, they feel, I don't have anybody to eat with. And so one of the colleges, they actually have an app that you can go onto the app. Is there anybody willing to have dinner with me?
Really?
So you have this incredible amount of alienation and loneliness in an elite system that was set up to completely counteract that. And so, and when you go into the residential college, you see there might be 3 or 4 undergraduates sitting there, and they're on their phones, looking at their phones. And so you have this tremendous increase of loneliness, people feeling like they're young people who are really smart and, have overcome, have accomplished incredible things in high school and college, thinking that they're imposters. Because they have this idealized view that everybody around them is a genius and it's always easy for everybody else.
So do you, with all of that said and your own experience and work, is there an answer to the question of how do we improve in this area other than turning your phone off or limit your time on social media? What else can we do?
I mean, there are a lot of things that we can do, and I think I think one of the things is not to idealize achievement and status. That that people, like when I was a kid and when you were a kid, that if you asked kids in high school, what do you want to be when you grow up? People would say, I'd like to be maybe a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher or a nurse or homemaker or whatever, something attainable. Today, one of the most common responses to that question in surveys that have been done is, I want to be famous. And when they ask people, what do you want to be famous in? They said, I don't care. And it's kind of like, social media is a lot of grandstanding, a lot of look at me, I am here behavior and all this kind of, so people wanting to be famous. So when you think about it, if you want to be famous, how many famous people in the world can there be? There are like 8 billion people in the world. Are 8 billion people going to be famous? And what happens when someone's famous? Are they happy? Are people in Hollywood happy people? Are people who are heads of hedge funds, are they happy people? Are politicians? Why would anybody want to go into politics today? They rip you apart. Are these happy people? They're famous, but there's this equation with merit and fame and status that's going to make you famous. That's going to make you happy.
Right.
What I once asked a patient who's a physician, very successful physician, great guy. Can you tell me about a moment that comes back in your memory when you felt really content, like this really feels good, this calm moment? He said, yeah, I remember I was doing my residency. It was in a different state. And we used to go out to eat our lunch outside overlooking a lake. And I remember sitting there with my buddies and we were looking at the ducks. And I remember those ducks. And that was a very content moment. So that's the image of his. It's better than Prozac, looking at ducks. It's like a contentment. The ducks are not like, in some status hierarchy, trying to get into an Ivy League school, on social media, the duck media, that it's a moment of calmness, of nature. We have a weekend house in rural Connecticut, and a number of years ago, my front desk woman said, gee, Bob, I bet you're really excited. You have a book that just came out. I said, I'm excited. It's not going to change my life, really. It's nice, But I can tell you what I really look forward to is every weekend walking on the Appalachian Trail with my wife, with our dog. That's what I look forward to. That makes me happy. I
love that.
Right. I had a patient recently. We were talking about because he goes jogging with his dog in Central Park or when he's on trips. I said, how much can we learn from a dog? And if you take a dog out in nature, everything is exciting. Why can't humans be like dogs? So his homework assignment was to be your own dog.
Ooh, that's good. That's so good. It's funny you bring that up because I think about that from time to time, just really paying attention to what's happening in nature because there's so many lessons that we learn, whether it's from a dog, right, watching other types of animals out there, how they coexist, how they communicate, what they learn. It really is remarkable when you think about it.
Right.
So I want to spend a couple of moments here talking about regret. We've mentioned it obviously in the conversation, but I would love it if you would share with us first the science behind regret itself. How does regret work? So what are we typically saying to ourselves that would lead us to experience that feeling of regret?
So I think humans are unique to the extent that we can imagine other kinds of possibilities that never happen. Mm-hmm. So your dog is not thinking about, gee, I wonder if I had taken that other trail, would my life be much better? The dog is really completely in the present moment, right? So regret is a consequence of the maturity and the growth of the human mind, about what we call counterfactual thinking, about possible worlds, like something I could do in the future that I could regret, or things I could have done in the past that I now regret. We think about possible worlds. But there's a productive aspect to regret, which is that regret helps us anticipate mistakes without our having to actually make the mistake. So I know that if I have spicy food late at night, I'm probably not going to sleep that well. So I anticipate that regret. And when researchers have, people who have high blood pressure, 50% a year later don't take their medication, which is a good predictor of having a heart attack. But when researchers say, I want you to imagine what it'd be like if you have a heart attack and you're paralyzed from the waist down, or you're dead and your husband or wife is mourning you, whatever it is, it dramatically increases taking medication. Having women think about mammography, and if you have breast cancer and you don't catch it soon enough, you could die from it, increases getting mammography. If you ask young people to think about, okay, you're 30 years old, let's say you're 65, at your current savings rate, what's your quality of life going to be when you're 65? You'll be living in a trailer park. So they begin saving more in terms of planned savings. So anticipating regret allows us to have a plan. And like a lot of people will say, oh, you should only live in the present moment. And I would say the only creature that lives completely in the present moment is a mosquito. I like to think about, okay, what am I going to do in November? What am I going to do next year or 5 years from now, whatever? To think about a plan, like, how do I write a book? I plan it, how did I get into college? I planned it. Not that all my plans come through, but regret is part of a planful strategy in our minds. So you want to think about, like, let's say you've done something that you realize is a mistake. Some people think they should never make mistakes. One of my staff members asked me, well, how do you know about these sorts of things? I said, because I've made every mistake that I can imagine that my patients have made. Here's the difference. I'm willing to learn from that mistake. And that, I think, is like in business, you make mistakes. You have a product that nobody wants, or you hire people based on intuition, not on capability. So thinking about I say don't waste a good mistake. Mistakes are experiments. You've already paid the cost. What did you learn from that? How can you activate a growth mindset so that you're not going to make that mistake in the future, and you'll make things better? But there's some people are defensive. They think, well, I don't want to admit I made a mistake because that means I was wrong. Of course you were wrong, right? Everybody is wrong at some point. Only somebody who's not living in the real world thinks they're not going to be wrong. One thing that's interesting about what I call adaptive humility, there's actually scales on this, that when they ask people to rate people that they trust at work, the people who have humility, who apologize, who say thank you, whatever, who treat everybody like an equal, those are the people want to work with, not the people who are right all the time. So it's like, for example, apologizing. I think there ought to be courses in college like Apology 101, and should be required every semester. That many years ago there was a movie called Love Story that was very popular.
Oh yeah,
by Eric Siegel.
Movie.
And Eric Siegel was one of the professors I had in college. And one of the quotes in the book is, love is never having to say you're sorry. And I've been married for a long time. I can tell you love is saying you're sorry on a regular basis. So saying you're sorry is it's a productive use of regret. It's saying that was a stupid thing for me to say. It wasn't fair. I'm really sorry. And so adaptive humility doesn't mean you're a loser, but it means that you're a team player. You're realistic. If you argue with reality on an ongoing basis, you're wrong 100% of the time.
True.
So as a business person, you have to learn from your customers where the mistakes are. You have to learn from all your colleagues, all the people working for you or with you, where the mistakes are. There's information out there. So regret is information. It's a growth mindset if you use it. But some people dwell on it. They ruminate. They criticize themselves. They withdraw. And those are people that we often see in therapy, Jay.
So what you just mentioned are some of the consequences of regret, and rumination is definitely one that I have experienced time and time again. I would say that I'm a bit better today only because I've used different tools and strategies to at least recognize it. And if I can recognize it, then I can do something about it. If I don't, then I just go down that swirl.
Sure.
And that's obviously very problematic. So when you're working with someone, I'd like to maybe provide our audience with a couple of tools that they can use when it comes to those things, those consequences of regret. So let's just take rumination as an example. In your experience, what is something, a starting point that someone can employ to help in that area?
Excellent question, Jay. And rumination is one of the major predictors of depression. So people who have a style of thinking, of ruminating, of dwelling, why, those people are more likely to get depressed and to stay depressed longer. Females are more likely to ruminate than males. So what we know is that, there are a lot of new techniques that are useful. The first thing is to label it as rumination. I'm just dwelling. Why did this? I can't believe this happened. Why? The second is to think about, what is the cost to me of ruminating? It's going to make me more depressed. I feel stuck in the past. What's the benefit? Well, maybe I'll figure out why. Rumination is often about why questions. An alternative to rumination is, let me accept that I may not ever get the answer to why, but maybe I can replace the why questions with how statements. How can I make things better? So, for example, let's say somebody's going through a breakup in a relationship, and they're ruminating, gee, why did that happen? Why did she break up or he break up with me? Whatever. Even if you found the answer, you still don't have a partner. So the question is, how can I have a partner? Or how can I make my life better? How can I engage in, rewarding activities that are within my control? Once you start shifting to action, you're outside of your head. You're now in the real world. So, for example, a patient ruminating about a breakup, why did she say this, or whatever it is. I said, even if you got the answer, you're still not living your life. Every time you go down the rabbit hole of rumination, asking why, or I can't believe this happened, you feel worse. So let's make a daily list of things that you can do. Exercise every day, proper diet, really focus on your work, focus on, other things in your social support network. You have to keep so busy on how I can make my life better, rather than why. You're not a historian. You're somebody living in the real world. And rumination, it's almost like it hijacks people. They think, I can't. How can I stop ruminating? I said, well, here's a metaphor to use. Let's think about the rumination as a telemarketing call. It says spam, possible spam. You have that says on your iPhone or your landline. I never pick it up, right? I hear it ringing. Yeah, I hear it ringing, but I'm never going to pick it up because, you want me to give $500 to your favorite candidate. Goodbye. So think about as telemarketing calls, something in your spam filter, background noise in the city. What am I going to focus on? What's in my control? You don't
That's
need
a big one.
Yeah. Some people think I need the answer. Why? No, what you don't need an answer. You need to have a better life. And a better life is one where you're actually engaged. You're not isolated. You're not passive. You're not in your head. You're actively doing. You have daily goals.
Yeah, this is brilliant. Thank you for sharing those strategies, because I think it's an area that we find is so prevalent, and the thing that we should be focused on, which is exactly what you said, is action, is taking action, not allowing that to keep us stuck in that negative swirl, but actually doing something. Now, you mentioned the word acceptance a moment or two ago. Did I hear that correctly, in that we start by accepting what is, or accepting reality, but then taking that next step of shifting into action, but it starts with acceptance, or
so
or no?
It's sort of like, I think in real life that almost everybody worries or ruminates or has regret. But I think about life as a train journey. And you're on the train, and let's say you go through a breakup or you have a business setback and whatever, you're ruminating about it. And so you get off at that stop and you're ruminating about it. Get back on the train, go to the next station of the train. Think about the stations on the train as chapters in a book. You're the author of the book. That's your life. What am I going to do at that next stop? What's that next chapter going to be? And that's what you have to think about. It's kind of like I remember many, many years ago, before I met my wife, going through a breakup, and I think, oh, why did that happen? Why did that happen? And then I realized, even if I found the answer, I didn't have a girlfriend, you know? So let me focus on something maybe that I could get. Maybe I can get a girlfriend, which some of your viewers might find surprising. But maybe I can find somebody who will put up with me, you know?
Sorry, Helen, you're the only one.
By far. But it's the interesting thing about getting stuck at that stop, as opposed, oh yeah, I'm ruminating, okay, let me get back on the train. One technique that some patients have found useful is rumination time, like making an appointment with your worry or your rumination. Oh. And, you know, it's kind of like, all right, so I'll ruminate between 3 o'clock and 3:30 in the afternoon. All other times, if I have a rumination or worry, I'll write it down, put it aside. Some people, oh, I can never do that. Almost everybody's able to do that to some extent. It's not like, you know, you're in your office, your boss walks in and says, you know, Bob, I really need you to pay attention to something very important. No, I can't do that. I'm ruminating. I'm ruminating about something that happened 5 years ago. Now, Bob, you're fired. Now, so you do interrupt a rumination. So putting it off, what happens when you put it off, you realize, gee, I was able to do these other things. I freed my mind from all this noise. And now that I have rumination time, it really doesn't bother me anymore. I mean, if you think about things you've ruminated in the past, why isn't it still bothering you? Because you got on with your life, right? Yeah. And so one of the goals in therapy is the who cares technique. Who cares about that anymore? Who cares about past relationships or past mistakes or past regrets? Getting to the point of indifference is the ultimate acceptance that allows you to open the door to the next chapter in your life, that you write that chapter.
This is just fascinating. So thank you for sharing that. So as we are wrapping up our conversation today, a couple of things that I just wanted to briefly ask you about CBT. In your experience, what do you think people get wrong about CBT?
I think what they get wrong about CBT, and I can understand why it's not illegitimate criticism, is that they think that CBT does not deal with emotion, does not deal with past experience, does not deal with a therapeutic relationship. And I've listened to those criticisms, and I've written books about every one of them. Mm-hmm. I've written books about resistance, about emotion, about the therapeutic relationship. And I think we can use the criticisms constructively. It's rather than be defensive and draw the wagons around yourself in a silo. That, okay, yeah, maybe that's the point. So let's try actually to use that. And I think more experienced CBT people look at the past experience that the patient has growing up. How did you learn those thoughts or values? What happened to you with your parents, earlier relationships, how the therapeutic. So there's a lot of complexity and a lot of differences among people doing therapy. So we have different camps, like religions, and we all point fingers at the others, and we're right. It's like what we call the my side bias. I'm always right, you're always wrong. I like to think maybe everybody has a piece of the truth and I can learn from.
That's great. So one other question for you, and then I'm going to ask one other favor for all of our audience members and for me. But the question is, I've come to believe that the quality of the questions that we ask ourselves can influence and impact the quality of our life. What are one or two bigger questions that you're asking yourself today? Just one or two big ones.
Well, I think questions that everybody could ask on a regular basis are, what are my ultimate values? And one way of thinking about your ultimate values is the way Aristotle defined virtue. Virtue, according to Aristotle, was the qualities in another person I would admire. So for me, I would admire somebody who's conscientious, somebody who's compassionate, somebody who's kind, somebody who's generous, somebody who has self-discipline. And so from Aristotle's point of view, become the person that you would admire, or aim for that. That's the big question. That's the overarching thing. The second thing would be, what is my plan? How am I going to do that? And the third thing is, am I carrying out that plan? And the fourth thing is, what gets in the way? And that applies to your relationship with your partner, with your kids, with your work, with your health, with your friendships. You always have control over your values. You don't have control over what people do. You don't have control over the outcome.
That is so good. Thank you for that. And then here is my favor. I would love it if you would give all of us, including me, a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do starting in this moment?
Do something that you're not doing, that you're avoiding. It could be your work, could be your exercise, it could be apologizing to somebody, it could be showing some generosity to a stranger. I think that, I think a title of a book that I'd like to write someday is How to Do What You Don't Want to Do So You Can Get What You Really Want to Get. And, we're so comfort oriented. And I think try to do something every day that's uncomfortable, that you don't want to do, but is the right thing to do, or would be an advantageous thing to do. Some people think, oh, I'm not motivated. I always think, like my office is on 58th Street on the east side. I think, gee, what if you saw me walking back and forth on 58th Street and looking out in the street and said, gee, Bob, what are you looking for? I'm looking for my motivation to show up so I can go to my office. Go to your office. Start your work, even if you don't want to, even if you're not motivated. And maybe the motivation will show up. Like, for example, exercise. Oh, I'm not motivated to exercise. What if you were willing to make a decision and commit to exercise every single day for 30 minutes, for 10 years? And every single time you exercise, you weren't motivated. They did brain scans. There's no motivation showing up, but you're still exercising. You're an automaton exercising on a Stairmaster, but you're doing it every single day for 10 years. You're going to be in great shape without motivation. But the reality of it is that action leads to motivation.
Absolutely. Great challenge. I appreciate you sharing that. And Dr. Leahy, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. What a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you going deep in certain areas, sharing of your experience, telling part of your story, and allowing the conversation to go in a number of different, very interesting areas. So I'm grateful for you. Thank you so very much.
Jay, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a great fun to do this. You take care.
Thank you. My pleasure. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a super quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing guests just like Dr. Leahy. And to listen to more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And my friends, until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure that you run to pick up a copy of Only If: Finding Freedom from Regret. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.